This webinar was recorded on August 17th, 2022 and has been edited from the original version.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Oregon Department of Education Child and Nutrition Program's webinar on menus and meal pattern procedures. This webinar is part of a series of technical assistance trainings that we are providing to child and adult food care program sponsors. My name is Caitlin Screen, and I will be your MC for today. Dee Dee Poynor will be your chat and Q&A host, and she will be tracking any questions that you ask during the webinar for our Q&A session at the end. Joining us are our amazing presenters, and I'll let each of them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shirley Wu, and I am a child nutrition specialist and technical assistance coordinator. Happy to see you all on this webinar.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah English, and I am a new child nutrition specialist, and I'm happy to be here with you all.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Kathy Brock, and I am also a child nutrition specialist and a team lead with applications and renewals for the community team. Thanks for coming by today.
Thank you, everyone. Let's take a look at what they will be presenting today. First, I will go over our learning objectives for this training. Then Shirley will take you through required documents needed for menu and meal pattern requirements. Next, Sarah will go over where to find menu and meal pattern resources. After that, Kathy will walk you through an overview of the menu and meal pattern procedure template. We'll then wrap up with some Q&As with Dee Dee. As you think of questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box. Dee Dee will be tracking the questions, and we will have time to go over these questions at the end of the session. If we do not get to your question, your assigned specialist will contact you after the webinar. Here are the 3 learning objectives we hope you will leave with today. First, you will understand documentation requirements for menus and meal pattern. Second, you will know where to find resources for menus and meal pattern requirements. And finally, you will have a completed menu and meal pattern written procedure or a path towards completing a sponsor-specific procedure. Shirley will now walk you through our first topic, understanding documentation requirements for menus and meal patterns.
Thank you, Caitlin. There are 3 parts to understanding documentation requirements. The first part will be short and we'll go over the purpose of documentation requirements. The second part will review required documents for menu and meal patterns. And the third will go over best practices for CACFP sponsors. You might notice that this is purely an overview of meal pattern documentation and does not go over meal pattern requirements itself. While we will define some aspects of meal pattern, the main goal is to ensure you understand what is required to show that you met meal pattern requirements. If you do need an update on meal pattern requirements, you can find our many meal pattern trainings on the ODE, CNP, CACFP training page. And Dee Dee will be sharing that link to the page in our chat box now. And Sarah will also go over some of the resources later, including where to find tools and handouts on our ODE CNP webpage. So let's start with our purpose. When you are looking at your menu documentations or when you are on an administrative review, you may wonder why your assigned specialist is requiring so much documentation. The reason we require all documentation is because it shows that all meals and snacks that were reimbursed met the requirements of the CACFP meal pattern. This is part of the regulations and is included in 7 CFR 226.15 E10. The regulation states that sponsors are required to collect and maintain program records, including copies of menus and any other food service records required by the state agency. Your documentation shows that you are fulfilling the main purpose of the CACFP, which is to help sponsors serve nutritious meals for their participants. The menus and all other food service records that we require are your proof that you met these CACFP requirements. So what exactly makes up the menus and other food service records that are required? In our next section, we will take a look at these documents and how they help you show that you met your meal pattern requirements. On the screen, we have our basic list of required documents that's needed to support your reimbursement claims and show that you are meeting meal pattern. This includes your working menus, your supporting documentation for your menus, and any documentation that supports individual meal modifications that were made. Working menus must document all actual food items served. And if you have infants in care, and these are participants under 1 year old, then individual infant menus are also required. All working menus must show any menu substitutions that were provided, whether it is for individuals or if it is for the entire meal service for that day. Supporting documentation that has to be kept will vary from sponsor to sponsor, and it will depend on what's served on the menu. Almost all menus, however, will include additional documentation that supports crediting for combination foods, whole grain rich items, breakfast cereals, yogurts, and tofu. Let's go over each of these documents in more detail. First, let's go over the working menu. The working menu is the most important document for showing that all meals served met meal pattern. A working menu is also sometimes known as a dirty menu and is different from a planned or marketing menu in that it documents all actual foods that were served to participants on the dates listed. This, along with your meal counts, make up the groundwork of claiming reimbursements for CACFP. A complete working menu must include dates of service, the site name or location if you have more than one site, the meals and snacks that were served, and the actual food items served. For example, instead of listing fruits, it must list a specific fruit, like apples. Very importantly, a menu must include all the substitutions that were served that day. This can include substitutions for one participant. For example, you might have one child who received soy milk instead of cow's milk. Or this can include substitutions for the whole meal service. For example, you might have apples planned for the menu, but supply issues meant that kitchen staff substituted canned peaches instead. In this case, the working menu must list peaches instead of apples. And in all cases, your working menu should document all actual food items that were served for all participants at your site. Menus must also include the milk type that is served for each age group, and this is because the required milk type varies by age group for CACFP. All whole grain rich items must be labeled, and you can write in either WGR or WW. You can also use another annotation too, as long as you have a key for that annotation. This documents that at least one whole grain rich item was served each day. And breakfast cereals must include the name of the cereal, and any yogurts that are served must include the flavor. Both of these are required to match with any supporting documentation that you have that shows the item meets sugar limit requirements. Finally, while this doesn't relate to meal pattern, the USDA non-discrimination statement must be included on the menu. All of these requirements were included in the 2019 ODE memo on CACFP menu documentation. And Dee Dee will put a link to this memo in the chat now. Thanks, Dee Dee. So here's a visual example of a complete working menu for 1 week's worth of breakfast. The dates are listed at the top and are now highlighted with the green box. The meal served is listed on the leftmost column and is now highlighted with the bright red box. The actual items served are listed on the row below the dates of service and are now highlighted in the blue box. The milk type served is listed at the bottom and provides a blanket statement regarding all milk listed on the working menu, and this is highlighted in the dark red box. The whole grain rich items are listed next to the actual grain items that were served, and this is now highlighted in the yellow boxes. Breakfast cereals listed has the name of the cereal listed and is now highlighted in the gray box. Finally, the purple box is highlighting the yogurt with the flavors served listed. We didn't highlight the site name and the non-discrimination statement since they are less relevant to our meal pattern, but they are both listed on this menu as well. While your menu may have a different format than this example, it should include all of these requirements. Sponsors who have infants in care will need to make sure that each individual infant has their meals documented separately. Individual menu records are required for infants since infant needs vary more than any other age group, and each infant in care may have different items served based on their developmental readiness. ODE CNP has developed a template for the 0 to 5 month age group and the 6 to 11 month age group. These templates include all required components and list out sections in the 0 to 5 month template for optional food items. There is also a section to include both birth dates and the formula or breast milk served. Didi will have a link to our CACFP meal pattern and menu planning page, which has the infant menu templates for download. Like the working menu for the child and adult care meal patterns, all infant menus must list actual foods served. Working menus must also list all substitutions that were provided. These can include substitutions for the menu where an entire component or food item is swapped out, or they can be substitutions for individual participants because they require a meal modification from the planned menu. We will discuss additional documentations that's required for meal modifications later, but let's see how we would document these different types of substitutions on our sample menu. Here's our ABC site with the same menu we were looking at earlier. And let's say that your local farmer wasn't able to get you any blueberries that you had planned to serve on Tuesday. So instead, you are serving canned mandarin oranges that you have in stock. This would be a substitution for the menu. And to document this, you would cross out blueberries and write in mandarin oranges. What if you have a participant that is dairy-free? You will want to make sure you list any substitutions that were provided to that participant. If this is a participant that receives this substitution on a consistent basis, you can write this in as part of your template. So here we have a statement that dairy-free participants receive unflavored soy milk and soy yogurt in the section where milk types are listed. And of course, because soy yogurt is listed, you want to make sure that you list the flavor of the yogurt that was served. If you have multiple individual food substitutions and there is a concern with privacy, or if you just don't have enough space on your working menu, you can list all substitutions served on a separate document. This substitutions list that's now on the screen shows multiple food substitutions. Note that substitution lists must also clearly identify the days the substitutions were served. For milk substitutes that are served for all meals and all days, like the soy milk or almond milk, you can indicate that on the list. For ones that are served on occasion only, like the soy yogurt and the fruit substitution, make sure to list the dates that the substitutions were served. Individual food substitution lists can be kept separately, but must be made available along with the working menu when it is requested by ODE. It is best practice to save all substitution lists with the working menu. This helps to facilitate claim consolidations monthly. Now that you have a good idea of what's required on the working menu, let's look at supporting documentation that must be on file. Supporting documentation are required because they provide additional crediting information for different food items. This is required for combination food items where crediting is hard to determine visually, and for whole grain rich foods, breakfast cereals, yogurts, and tofu, which have additional nutrient requirements that need to be met. First, let's define combination foods. Combination foods can be defined as either foods that contain more than one food component or foods that contain both creditable and non-creditable foods. For example, a burrito would be considered a combination food because it contains both a grain component and most of the time a meat or meat alternate component and maybe some vegetable components too. You can credit up to 3 different food components for each combination food. Another example of a combination food would be pepperoni. While it can only credit towards the meat alternate component, it also contains a lot of fillers and other ingredients that would not be counted as part of the component. All combination foods that credit for a meal pattern component will require additional supporting documentation. The type of supporting documentation required for combination foods will vary depending on if it is a homemade item versus a commercially prepared item. Homemade items are items which are created in-house or in your kitchen. Your kitchen staff assembles and cooks the item on site, and they will know the ingredients and amounts that go into the product. Homemade combination items, or homemade combination foods that is, will require a standardized recipe. Sponsors can create their own recipes and use the Food Buying Guide's Recipe Analysis Workbook to credit their components. Or if you don't want to do all the extra work of crediting, you can use already credited standardized recipes instead. ODE CMP has links to standardized recipes on our CACFP meal pattern and menu planning page, and Didi can share the link to that page again in the chat. Commercially prepared items are ones which come already made and only require you to heat up or serve the items. Since the items were not made in your kitchen, you will not know the amount of ingredients that went into the product. To know how much each item will credit for each component, you will need at least one of the following: a child nutrition label, it's also known as a CN label, a product formulation statement, also known as a PFS, or the item has to have a standard of identity. We'll look at standardized recipes first. Homemade items require standardized recipes because the recipe will have the necessary information to tell us how much each serving will credit towards CACFP meal patterns. Not all recipes are standardized. So for example, the recipes that you find on food blogs or in your home kitchen, it might only have vague information on the amount of ingredients you need and the number of people that it will serve. A standardized recipe, in contrast, is one that has been tested for food service and includes the following information: ingredients with standard measurements, directions for cooking that will produce the same results each time, the yield, which can include both portion sizes or number of servings, and finally, the crediting information for CACFP. While in the past, you may have had to credit recipes by hand, the Food Buying Guide now has a recipe analysis workbook that helps you to calculate your crediting. And Didi will enter the Food Buying Guide's link into that chat box. All right, so here's an example of a standardized recipe. And this is one of the already credited recipes from OSU's Food Hero. It has ingredients with measurements, directions for cooking, yield information, and crediting information for CACFP. Any recipe created and used as supporting documentation must have all of these elements. When it comes to commercially prepared foods, there are several options for supporting documentation, and in all cases, the goal is the same. It is to make sure that your item's crediting can be determined. CN labels are part of USDA's voluntary labeling program for manufacturers that provide combination food items to schools and institutions that participate in child nutrition programs. They are only available for select food items that contribute to the meat and meat alternate component. And while they are not widely available, they can also occasionally be found in items that are sold at big box stores. The CN labels will always have the border with the 4 CN on each side, a 6-digit product ID on the top right, and the serving size and meal pattern contribution of each serving within the borders. If your item has a CN label, make sure to save the label by cutting it off the box, or you can take a clear, legible image of the CN label with all of the required details. If a commercially prepared combination food item does not have a CN label, which is in most cases, you would need a product formulation statement. PFSs serve the same function to the CN labels by providing crediting information, and these can be requested from the manufacturer directly, although not all manufacturers are willing to provide them. Always make sure that a commercially prepared combination food has either a CN label or a PFS before you use it for your menu. A product formulation statement must have the following information. It must be on a manufacturer's letterhead, have a list of all ingredients, the ingredient weight per serving, the weight of the creditable ingredients, the crediting amount per serving, and the signature of the manufacturer's representative verifying that the information provided is correct. The PFS or CN label used will support and verify that the amount served to your participants met CACFP serving size requirements. Sometimes this is not entirely clear, and an additional standardized recipe must be on file to show what was served to all participants. For example, you might have a PFS that states that the turkey ham that you served in your deli sandwich credits for 2 ounces of meat per 6 slices. So how many slices did you put in your deli sandwich? That part will need to be documented on a separate standardized recipe. There are some rare cases where you may have commercially prepared food that have a standard of identity. Standards of identity are set by the Food and Drug Administration and provides a minimum essential characteristic needed for a product. Foods with a standard of identity can also predictably have a set of specific food components in each packaging. ODE-CMP has a list of all meat and meat alternate products with a standard of identity. And Dee Dee will share a link to that handout in the chat. If you are using the standard of identity to credit an item, make sure that you are saving both the food item label or an image of the label with the product name and save the standards of identity list. You must make sure that the product name on the label is an exact match to the name on the standards of identity list. Any commercially purchased combination items that are not on this list will need a CN label or PFS. Now that we went over the supporting documentation required for combination foods, let's look at supporting documentation that must be saved for whole grain rich items. As a reminder, all whole grain rich items must be labeled as such on the menu, and at least 1 grain item served each day must be whole grain rich. The supporting documentation that is the most widely available will be the ingredient label. If you are using the ingredient list to support your whole grain rich items, you must check to see that the first grain has to be a whole grain, and the next 2 grain items on that list must be either whole grain or enriched. The example on the screen shows an ingredient list with only 2 grain ingredients, where the first ingredient is a whole grain and the second grain ingredient is an enriched grain. This ingredient list would support a whole grain rich claim. Since most ingredient lists do not have the name of the product right next to it, make sure to save the product labels with the name of the item for easier documentation tracking. If your ingredient label does not support a whole grain rich claim, but you have other supporting documentation that can be used to show whole grain rich status, you can save those instead. Other methods of crediting whole grain rich items can include WIC lists, grain standards of identity, whole grain health claims, and PFSs. Finally, we have our supporting documentation for breakfast cereals, yogurts, and tofu. All three of these items will require nutrition fact labels to be saved. For breakfast cereals, the label must show that the sugar level does not exceed the limit of 6 grams of total sugar per dry ounce of cereal. The yogurt labels, similarly, must not exceed the limit of 23 grams of total sugar per 6 ounces of yogurt. And tofu must have protein levels of at least 5 grams of protein per 2.2 ounces or a quarter cup per serving. If the nutrition fact labels show that the items are creditable for CACFP, then sponsors will need to save the label as supporting documentation. Like ingredient lists, nutrition fact labels often do not include the product name. So you will also want to save the product label and attach the two together so you can support the crediting. It is important that you check your supporting documentation first to make sure that items are creditable before you put them on the menu. The final category of supporting documentation will only be applicable if you have individual participants who need meal modifications that do not meet meal pattern, or if they require milk substitutes that are nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. Some sponsors like to have documentation for all meal modifications, even if the substitutions will meet meal pattern. This is allowed, but is not required for reimbursement. There are 2 documents you can use for meal modifications. These are medical statements or meal preference request forms. The medical statement is required for all medical meal modifications that do not meet meal pattern. While you can also use this form for medical meal modifications that do meet meal pattern, it is only required for CACFP when the modifications requested will cause meals and snacks to be non-creditable. In situations where a medical statement is required, the actual ODE CMP medical statement form that you see on the screen does not need to be used. However, you will want to make sure that any doctor's notes or templates that are used include all required information. In addition to participant name, it must also include the major life activity or bodily function affected that restricts the diet, an explanation of the accommodations that must be made, the foods to be substituted or other accommodations that are required, and the signature of a state licensed healthcare professional. The benefit of using the ODE CMP medical statement is that all requirements are listed on the form, and it includes fill-in sections for your organization to add your information. Anytime you see an individual substitution on the menu that does not meet meal pattern, you will want to check to ensure that a medical statement is on file. If it is not on file, talk to your staff to see what the situation is and disallow the meals. For more detailed information on meal accommodations, you can review the ODE CMP meal accommodations training on YouTube. And Dee Dee can share that link to the training in our chat. Let's go to the meal preference request form now. So this can be used for participants who request nutritionally equivalent milk substitutes. Like the medical statement, sponsors are not required to use the ODE CMP template, but it is a good idea since the template includes all required elements, including the name of the milk substitute that will be served, the signature of the parent and guardian or adult participant, and their request that the substitute be served to the participant. On the template, this is done by simply checking off a box. This form can also be used if you have families or participants who require other non-medical food accommodations. While ODE-CMP does not require that you keep documents for non-medical accommodations, except for nutritionally equivalent milk substitutes, it can be a good idea for tracking all requested substitutions. As a reminder, non-medical meal accommodations can only be reimbursed if the substitutions meet meal pattern. Again, more information is available in our meeting meal accommodation requirements video, which Dee Dee shared for the last slide, and both forms are available for download from the ODE CNP meal accommodations page, which Dee Dee will now share in the chat. Now that we have gone over all supporting documents that you would typically need for your working menus, let's review what we discussed. The working menu is required, and sponsors with infants in care will also need individual infant menus for each infant. Any menu substitutions, whether it is for the whole meal service or if it's for a participant, will need to be documented on the working menu. Supporting documentation is used to support crediting for items listed on the working menu. Items that will need supporting documentation includes combination foods, whole grain rich foods, breakfast cereals, yogurts, and tofu. And finally, if you are providing meal modifications that do not meet meal pattern, additional supporting documentation will be required. A medical statement will be required for medical requests, and a meal preference request form for nutritionally equivalent milk substitutes. So let's take all of the information that has been provided, and we will try a few poll questions and see what we have all learned. So Caitlin will be opening up the poll right now. And our first poll question, in this question, take a look at this menu that's on your slide. And we'll give you a little bit of time to review the menu. We know there's a lot of words on there. Which items on this menu will require additional supporting documentation? Is it all fruits and vegetables, all entrees or main dishes, all milk, or will none of them require any additional documentation? So think combination foods, whole grain rich items maybe. All right, so let's give it 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And we'll close and share the answers. And just so you're all aware, you can move that box that has the polls, so that way you can see the screen as well. Okay, so great job, everyone. So most of you chose the correct answer, which is B, all entrees or main dishes. And the reason why you need supporting documentation for all entrees is for several reasons. First, that all combination foods that will credit for both the grain and meat alternate components will require supporting documentation. And at least 3 of the main dishes also include whole grain rich items as marked by the WGR. And all whole grain rich items will require additional supporting documentation. All right, so thanks everybody for doing that. So let's move on to a second poll question now. What type of documentation do you need to save for a commercially prepared chicken patty? Is it a standardized recipe, a CN label, a product formulation statement, or a standard of identity list? And just as a hint, you can choose all that apply, and there might be more than one answer. So this is commercially prepared and a chicken patty. Okay, we'll wrap it up. Let's close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's close and share our poll results. Okay, so great job. It looks like the majority of you chose the right options, and they include both the CN label and product formulation statements. And both of these will work as supporting documentation for a commercially prepared chicken patty. And you don't need to have both, just to be clear. Just one of the two will be sufficient. If they do have a CN label, use the CN label. If they have a product formulation statement, use that PFS instead. One thing I do want to point out is that most foods do not have a standard of identity, and chicken patty, unfortunately, is one of those without a standard of identity. So that one wouldn't be an option. And because it is commercially prepared, a standardized recipe wouldn't be what you would usually use, although you could, of course, use it when have an additional standardized recipe when you're crediting for a chicken patty in a sandwich, for example. All right, so let's move on to our third poll question now, and this will be our last poll question for this section. So participants who are served a non-nutritionally equivalent milk substitute, so emphasis on the non, must have blank on file in order to claim a reimbursable meal. So this might require a little bit more knowledge of what non-nutritionally equivalent milk substitutes are, but is it A, a medical statement, B, a meal preference request form, C, a milk substitute form, or D, no forms are needed at all? So think about this a little bit. And we'll give it a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's close the poll and we'll share the results. All right, so you guys are rock stars. So it looks like most of you got all of these answers correct. And the answer, of course, is a medical statement because of the bolded word non. This is a milk substitute that does not meet nutritional equivalency to cow's milk and would not meet meal pattern requirements. When you have food substitutions that do not meet meal pattern requirements, a medical statement or doctor's note must be on file for meals to be reimbursable. And this would include items like rice milk, almond, and there's even some soy milk out there that are not fortified to nutritional equivalence. So you do want to be careful when you are providing these milk alternatives for your participants. So great job, everybody. Now that we have gone over our first two sections, let's put this all together with some best practices. In this section, we will discuss timelines and documentation management. It may seem overwhelming to have to collect all of these documents, especially if you're new to the program, but you can think of this process as having 3 distinct parts. What you need to do when you are prepping and developing the menu, what you need to do when you are serving the menu, and what you need to do when you are checking the menu prior to claiming meals. The timelines will vary depending on your program. There's some sponsors who pre-plan their menus for the full year and they make adjustments as they go along. Others create monthly or bi-weekly menus. And there's really no one right answer on when to prep your menus. The main point you want to keep in mind is that your process gives you enough time to first understand the meal pattern prior to developing the menus. That's a very important part. And while you are developing the menus, make sure you are collecting all supporting documentation and check the crediting to ensure you are meeting minimum portion size requirements. Once a menu is set, work with your kitchen staff so they know what to expect, and your purchasing staff has enough time to procure all the foods. Once you are ready for service, you want to make sure that you don't waste all of the preparation you put into your menu, and you use the actual menu as the basis for your meal service. While there may be situations where you need to have substitutions or changes to the menu last minute, it's always a good idea to serve meals that you know will credit for all components and have sufficient amounts of the item to meet minimum portion sizes by age group. In cases where you have substitutions, make sure that kitchen staff know how to document all substitutions served and whether it is for all participants or all individuals. When you are ready to consolidate your claims, you will want to double check all required documents are on file and verify that the meals that were documented on the menus met meal pattern requirements. This is also a good time to make sure all supporting documents are on file, especially for any last-minute substitutions. The amount of supporting documentations we listed may seem overwhelming, but it is important to remember that these documents can be more manageable with a system in place. The first thing to note is our documentation requirements. And like all child nutrition programs, all CACFP documents must be kept for 3 years plus the current fiscal year. This is important to track, especially if you are keeping physical documents and need to figure out how much archival space you may need. Documents do not have to be physical, they can be electronic. However, our usual caveat with electronic records do apply. The electronic records must be available on request. They must be accessible, meaning that it is in a format that can be opened by most people, and they must be legible. Whether you are using physical or electronic records, it is a good idea to file your menus and menu substitution list together so that you have a complete record of what was served. It's also a good idea to have a separate folder for supporting documentation and a separate recipe folder for the kitchen. This way, you don't need to constantly ask your kitchen staff for copies of the recipes when you are checking on crediting. And finally, it's helpful to organize your files by month and copy all the supporting documentation that's used for that month into the folder. This is easier and less costly with electronic records since it doesn't incur print costs. The main benefit of doing this is that you can easily track your supporting documentation when you're doing a claim edit check. And finally, you do want to make sure that your supporting documentation is up to date. You will want to check it periodically since manufacturers may change formulations for their products. Sponsors are responsible for maintaining up-to-date documentation for all menu items that are served. And to facilitate this, it is recommended that sponsors who are using a vendor or a food service management company include having up-to-date supporting documentation as part of their contract. The contract should always stipulate that meals provided meet meal pattern requirements, and supporting documentation helps to prove that these requirements are met. It is always a good idea to be proactive about serving only creditable foods. So it's recommended that you ask your vendor or food service management company to supply only combination foods that have product formulation statements or CN labels. If you do not have a vendor or food service management company that can provide you with supporting documentation, make sure you are reaching out to manufacturers directly and getting current product formulation statements or CN labels. In all cases, if you do not have supporting documentation when it's required, you should not use the commercially processed combination foods. And as a recap, we went over the purpose of having documentation requirements. We reviewed all the required documents and we went over some best practices. And now let's turn this over to Sarah, who will go over the resources that we have. So take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Shirley. Since we went over so much information on documentation for the CACFP meal pattern, we wanted to provide you with a helpful handout that provides an overview of information that was covered during Shirley's section. This handout was updated from our original version of the Documenting Your CACFP Meal Pattern handout. And the current version includes information on all required documentation for documenting your menu. This handout was sent as a link to you via email if you registered before this week. It will also be sent out to all participants of this training in our post-training email. Dee Dee is now sharing the direct link to this file in our chat. We also have plenty of other resources available on our CACFP meal pattern and menu planning page. This page provides resources to help CACFP sponsors with understanding meal pattern requirements. Resources are categorized and include handouts developed by OD and USDA. Dee Dee will put this link in the chat now. I wanted to call out specific resources on this page that may be helpful if you had questions regarding combination foods. Under the meal pattern resources section, you can expand the section on combination food resources. This will show resources of product specification sheets, product formulation statement, template for manufacturers, and a sample letter you can send to manufacturers if you are requesting a PFS. It also includes the standard of identities list for meat alternates that Shirley went over earlier, and some templates for creating your own standardized recipes. When you're creating standardized recipes, crediting help is available from the food buying guide. You can register for the site or sign in as a guest. We recommend registration since it will allow you to save specific food item information and use that recipe analysis workbook, which can help provide crediting documentation for your recipes. This workbook is available on the front page of the food buying guide as a navigation button on the right side of the page. Dee Dee will provide a link to this in the chat. Another helpful set of resources includes the grain component resources. This is under the meal pattern resources section. If you are confused about what grains count as a whole grain rich item, you can check out multiple resources, including the USDA Team Nutrition's Identifying Whole Grain Rich Items worksheet and a flowchart for creditable and whole grain rich grains. Our resources on the same page also include the pocket size cards for sugar limits on breakfast cereals and yogurts. This will provide sugar limits for different serving sizes, so you don't have to do any calculations yourself. One final resource I want to highlight on this page is the CACFP Crediting Handbook. This is a USDA created resource and acts as a supplemental resource for the food buying guide. It provides more explanations on meal pattern requirements and a helpful table for each component showing whether items are creditable or not. Dee Dee will provide a direct link to this resource in the chat. I also wanted to point out another ODE page that provides a lot of resources for CACFP sponsors. This is the CACFP training page. Dee Dee will put that link in the chat now. This page contains many CACFP meal pattern training videos with information on general meal pattern information, infant meal patterns, grains, menu monitoring, and more. We recommend using these videos to get up to date on the meal pattern before you start the process of reviewing your menus. Now that we've gone over some of the resources, let's do a quick poll. So which resource would a sponsor use to figure out food component crediting for a standardized recipe? Is it a child nutrition label, a product formulation statement, the food buying guide's recipe analysis workbook, or the standards of identity handout? We'll give you a little more time. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close that poll. The answer is C, the food buying guide's recipe analysis workbook. It looks like most of you picked that right answer. The recipe analysis workbook is a helpful tool to credit homemade recipes. All other resources listed on the poll would be needed for commercially prepared combination foods only. Now, if you know what resources are available, let's move this over to Kathy to discuss written procedures.
All right, thanks, Sarah. And now that we've walked through all those resources that are able to assist us with meeting menu and meal pattern requirements, let's take a look at the menu records procedure template you were provided prior to this webinar. And as you can imagine, Dee Dee is going to be sharing that link in the chat with you now. If you're able to have the document open on your desktop along with the webinar, you can follow along and take notes while we go through the template. If you're unable to have the template open, I'll have sections of the template pulled up for us to review here in the presentation. This template is meant to assist in creating your organization's written procedure for maintaining menu records. It is important that all staff involved with this procedure are trained on the details of how to implement the procedure. Keep in mind when completing this template for your organization that when following this procedure, it is expected to produce accurate outcomes when replicated. So let's get started. All right, the first step in the process is who is responsible for creating the menu and the time frame it is done in. You'll notice on the template there are a few gray fields. The gray areas indicate a place that needs to be completed by you as a sponsor and will be specific to your organization's operations. When completing this section, you will be entering who is responsible for each action and when, which is the timing of the task or the time frame for completion. The second position title space here is for staff that the menu will meet documentation requirements. This may or may not be the same staff person that creates the menu. The documentation requirement lays out all the items that must be included to ensure the menu meets compliance requirements. And the second step of the menu records procedure is the review of the planned menu. It is important to review the planned menu before meals are served to ensure that the meal pattern is being met. It is best practice to have the staff position in this role be different from the staff person who created the menu. You will also establish the amount of time this must be completed in. Think of the time from when the menu is reviewed to when it is served as being the grace period to correct any issues. Issues can include recipes missing crediting information or commercially prepared items missing CN labels. The next staff person in this step will be the person who is responsible for remediating any issues with the menu. Describing the steps the staff person will take to correct the issue ensures that the staff responsible have a roadmap of what to do. This can include using the Food Buying Guide's recipe analysis workbook to credit recipes, contacting a food distribution company for CN labels, or reviewing and collecting food labels to ensure items meet meal pattern requirements. Well, you'll look at that. We have arrived at our first checkbox in this procedure. If you see a checkbox and it applies to your organization, be sure to mark the checkbox to indicate that the step is being used in your organization's procedure. In this case, if your center has infants in care, you would complete this section. Then complete the staff person that ensures that separate menu documentation for each infant is completed. The staff person who ensures completion of infant menus may be different from the staff position who is responsible for ensuring the correct menu is used for the infant. As a reminder, infant menus have two age ranges, 0 to 5 months or 6 to 11 months. If there's a section that is not applicable to your organization, so in this case, if your center does not have infants in care, you may opt to delete this from the template. Look at that, away it went. This step in the process is about reviewing the working menu. Even the best laid plans can fail, and here is your chance to catch any missteps before it becomes a costly error. A working menu is required to document any substitutions to the menu. During administrative reviews, ODE CMP staff do compare invoices and receipts to menus to make sure the purchases align with the menu. Taking action in this step can help prevent findings and fiscal action in this area. First, how often will working menus be reviewed? And what position will be responsible for doing this? As a reminder, substitutions to the menus also include substitutions made for participants with a medical statement to request special meals and or accommodations or participants who have meal preference request forms. Also in this step, you will be documenting the process for what to do if the working menu has errors. Include what position will be responsible and the steps they will take to correct errors. This will also include documenting meals that are unable to be claimed based on the menu for the day not meeting meal pattern requirements. If your organization purchases meals from another organization or business and has a vended meal agreement, this step in the procedure must be completed. Include the vendor name, the staff position that will receive planned menus, and the time frame in which the vendor is required to submit planned menus to the sponsor prior to the meals being served. Additionally, include the position that is responsible for ensuring menus have all documentation to show that the meal pattern or the menu meets meal pattern requirements. If there are errors, name the position and what steps they will take with the vendor to correct the menu, as well as how this position will communicate with the vendor and the timeline for corrections. The next section covers combination foods documentation requirements. As a reminder, it is imperative documentation is on file for any and all combination foods served and are needed to meet meal pattern requirements. This can be anything from a pre-made frozen breaded chicken patty to hummus to a homemade turkey and cheese sandwich. If it is intended to count towards the meal pattern, crediting information is required. One of the most convenient ways to meet the meal pattern requirements with homemade foods is to use what the procedure refers to as pre-approved recipes. What is meant by pre-approved is that the recipe is from an organization such as the USDA, Food Hero, or ICN, and it contains all necessary information to make the recipe, such as the ingredients, amounts, and instructions, and the crediting information for each meal component the recipe contributes to. A pre-approved recipe also includes the serving size needed to do so. Note that it is always important you check recipes for crediting information. Not all recipes from the USDA, Food Hero, ICN, or other state agencies have this information. If the crediting information is missing, it is your organization's responsibility to credit the recipe. If your organization uses pre-approved recipes, enter the position for each section in this step. Sources for the recipes, timeframes for review to ensure compliance is being met, and what staff will review to ensure compliance and will do if they find they are out of compliance. An example of a pre-approved recipe that is no longer in compliance would be if substitutions are made to the recipe that result in it no longer meeting the same crediting information. For instance, if you're using, the recipe calls for chicken breasts and then your cook decides to start using boneless, skinless chicken thighs. If your organization chooses to use recipes that do not already have crediting information, there's a bit more work that needs to be done to ensure the item meets meal pattern requirements. First, complete the sponsor information in the top section. When it comes to the sponsor sites field, if each site has its own kitchen, this field will be meals on site. Alternatively, if your organization is a multi-site sponsor and uses a central location for making meals, this would be meals at multiple sites. Next, identify the position that will be responsible for the creation and oversight of homemade recipes, as well as the time frame for their creation. Note that there is a complete list on the template of all the items that must be included on a homemade recipe. There is also a double check step in this section. Here you will identify the staff position responsible for double checking the recipe, the timeline to review recipes, and a description of what will be done to ensure recipes are current and correct. Under additional required documentation, list the staff position responsible for ensuring all additional documentation is accurate and maintained on file. Additional documentation includes child nutrition and manufacturer's product formulation statements for commercially prepared combination foods, ingredient labels for determining enriched and whole grain products, standards of identity products for commercially prepared products without a CN label or a PFS, and nutrition facts for ready-to-eat breakfast cereals, yogurts, and tofu products. The second section of this step is to identify the position and the timeline to ensure all documentation is on file and up to date. Finally, there is a section on meal accommodations and modifications. The name, the position responsible for providing the required forms to allow for meal accommodations and preferences, and the position responsible for reviewing and providing any follow-up. As meal accommodations may be requested for life-threatening conditions, a short timeline should be established to review forms that are submitted. If the form is not complete, describe the process staff will use for follow-up. If the form is complete, describe the process for meeting the meal accommodation requested, which includes who the accommodation is communicated to, how that is done, and tracking accommodations. In part B of this template is all about location, location, location. We reviewed 4 key pieces for menu and menu planning, which includes planned menus, working menus, recipes, and additional documentation. As with other areas on this procedure, edit this section as necessary. Please be as specific as possible when describing where this documentation is held. If it is being stored in a binder, where can someone unfamiliar with this documentation find that binder? Is it on top of the refrigerator or in a cabinet to the left of the sinks? This is not only helpful for locating documentation during a review, but also when there's a new cook or kitchen lead, or someone needs to fill in for that role due to an absence. As a friendly reminder, all records must be maintained for 3 years plus the current fiscal year. These records must be available to ODE C&P upon request. Failure to provide ODE C&P with requested records could result in meals being disallowed and fiscal action taken against your organization. So while this part of the procedure is near the end of the document, it is vital to ensure menu documentation is maintained to prevent meal disallowances. Lastly, we have the procedure backups. This will lay out who will fill in and what steps they will fill in for if the staff person originally assigned to the task is unavailable. If you have any questions while you're developing the menu records procedure, please reach out to your assigned child nutrition specialists. We are truly here to help. Now it is time to put what I just reviewed with you all to the test. Which one of these is not part of the menu records procedure template? Is it vended meals, meal count records, meal accommodations, or where the record is kept? I'll give you about a minute here to put in your answers. So let that commence. And I'll give you all a few more seconds since this section was kind of short. So hopefully still fresh in your mind about what we just reviewed, or if you are fortunate enough to have that document up next to you, you can take a quick breeze through that to see which one of these items is not in that template. Okay, and 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and close this poll. All right. It looks like we almost had an even split, but for the majority, meal count records is the one that is not a part of this procedure. Meal count records, while important, are part of the claims procedure. And vended meals, although prepared by another organization, are still required to have meal pattern documentation maintained by the sponsor and are part of the menu records procedure template. Meal accommodations and modifications are also part of this procedure, as any changes to the menu are required to be documented. And where that record is kept is all about that location, location, location. Where can all this documentation be found when it's needed? So from here, I'm going to hand this over to Dee Dee, who's going to lead us in a question and answer portion of today's presentation. Take it away, Dee Dee.
Great, thank you, Kathy. As Kathy said, last but definitely not least is our questions and answers portion of the webinar. When you registered, you had the option to submit questions to be covered during this webinar. So here we'll go over just a few of those scenarios. And after we go over our prepared questions and answers, we'll take a look at any of the questions that have come in to the chat during the webinar. So just remember, if you haven't gotten yours in yet, please go ahead and add those to the chat. And we'll dive into the first question. Okay, so our first question is, we make PB&J, or peanut butter and jelly, sandwiches for participants. Do I really need a standardized and credited recipe? Sarah, can you take this one for us?
Yes, the answer is yes. All homemade combination foods require standardized and credited recipe. A PB&J sandwich includes two components, the meat alternate and the grains component.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Something as simple as a PB&J, but still needs it. Okay, on to the next question. I often use ICN and Food Hero recipes that have already been standardized and credited. Sometimes we make adaptations to them, such as changing the meat we use or the number of servings. Do I need to do anything to document this? Shirley, can you take this one?
Of course. So recipes are credited based on the exact standardized recipes. If credited recipes are adapted, for example, like what Kathy had said earlier about changing chicken breast to chicken thighs, then a new alternate standardized and credited recipe must be on hand to support the actual food served. You'll need to use the resources that we went over earlier to re-standardize and recredit the recipes. The recipe analysis workbook on the food buying guide will be the best resource to use for updating crediting.
Great, thank you, Shirley. We'll move on to question 3, which is what documentation is required to support ounce equivalents for grains? Sarah, can I toss this to you?
Absolutely. Moving from servings to ounce equivalents for grains does not impact the documentation required. You will continue to save documentation of whole grain rich items and grains as part of combination foods, as discussed earlier in this training.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Good to know nothing changed with the documenting. Okay, on to our next last planned question for the webinar. So again, remember to get your questions into the chat if you still have them. Question 4, do I really have to review all working menus and supporting documentation prior to submitting a monthly claim for reimbursement? Kathy, can you go over this for us?
Yes, I can. And yes, you do. So when submitting a monthly claim for reimbursement, you're certifying that the claim is true and accurate based on reimbursable meals served. It is the responsibility of the sponsor to ensure that only eligible meals are claimed for reimbursement. Our claims procedure webinar covers the steps that sponsors must take prior to submitting a claim.
Great, thanks for covering that, Kathy. And I'll go ahead and add that link for the claims procedure webinar into the chat now, and we'll move on to our next slide. Okay, so before we end our questions and answers portion, we would like to take the opportunity to answer questions that have come in during the webinar. So again, go ahead and send those to the chat box if you haven't already. We have had a couple come in, so we are going to mute for just a few moments to gather ourselves, and we'll be right back to provide answers. Okay, so we'll jump in here. We did have a question come in, so I'll just read the question here. Could production records that are updated daily, as one would a working menu, be sufficient in place of a working menu? Sarah, can you take that one?
I sure can. So the answer is yes. We see it all the time. As long as it meets the requirements listed for the working menu, a production record is acceptable.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And we had a second question here. So Kathy, I'm going to send this one your way. If a child in care has a medical meal modification in place and at some point no longer needs it, how do you handle that? Do we make a notation on the original form? The cook here normally removes them from the files. So do they need to keep those for their records?
Well, to start off, you want to throw a small party for everyone in the kitchen for making it that far, and a high five to that kiddo for finally overcoming needing that meal accommodation. And all kidding aside, although really everyone needs a reason to party every so often. So in any case, with that meal modification form, it's going to be best practice for you to have that family sign and date it with a statement on there saying that the modification is no longer needed. And then with that form, You're going to hold on to that with your other documentation as you typically would for 3 years plus the current fiscal year. So thanks for that question.
Great questions, and thank you, Kathy, for taking that one, and Sarah, the first one. Let's see, we did have another question come in here. So Shirley, I'm going to send this one to you. The question is there a place to find more basic standardized recipes like the PB&J mentioned or a grilled cheese sandwich? I'm not sure, or I am sure we aren't the first CACFP sponsors to serve these kinds of meals. I'm betting that's true. Shirley?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I would recommend checking out the ICN. So that's the Institute of Child Nutrition. They do have a recipe box that does have some basic recipes. So it might not have everything that you're looking for, but that would be a good place to check first for some good basic recipes. And I'm going to go ahead and share that link into the chat box right now. You can also go ahead and find that link in our CACFP meal pattern and menu planning page. And I believe grilled cheese is one of the CACFP recipes that they have in the ICN recipe box.
Great, thank you, Shirley. And I believe, just if you're having a hard time finding the grilled cheese, I think it might be under toasted cheese in the recipe box. So you might play with the wording a little bit there, but definitely ICN is a good place to go. Okay, that looks like it's brought us to the end of the questions that have come in. So we'll put it on mute for just a moment longer. Again, if you have any last minute questions you want to get in, please send those in and we'll get those answered as best we can. So give us just a moment. Okay, Shirley, I'm going to get this one back to you here. Does ODE C&P still prefer the menu items have the codes like D12 to document and the USDA approved recipes?
So yeah, that's also a great question. And I would say if you have that code, put that onto the menu if you can. Sometimes it's hard to find some of these recipes when they've been archived, especially if they're older recipes. But a lot of times the crediting will still be valid. And so we can use those codes to search for that recipe and just make sure that all of the crediting is up to date and correct. So if you have it, feel free to put it in there. It's not a requirement, but we always appreciate it when we see it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shirley. And probably helpful too, if there's new kitchen staff looking for a specific recipe, make sure they get directed to the right version. Wonderful. Okay, I'm seeing some thank yous. I'm not seeing any more questions right now. So we'll go ahead and pass this back to Caitlin. But thank you all again for hanging with us through our questions and answers portion of the webinar. And it was really great to have you here. So Caitlin, back to you.
Thanks, Dee Dee. Like Dee Dee said, if you have any additional questions that were not addressed today, please reach out to your assigned child nutrition specialist. Sponsors who are looking for additional information can also refer to the ODE C&P monthly CACFP newsletter called Knowing and Growing. This newsletter will include all new memos that were released in the past month, in addition to information on available grants, trainings, and important deadlines. This is sent out each month to all responsible principals listed in your C&P Web sponsor information sheet, and information in this newsletter must be reviewed by the responsible principals. Memo updates and program updates are required information for sponsors to know, while additional grant information and resources are helpful to review. If you're not on the list and you want to receive the newsletter, you can sign up using the link on this slide, and this will also be shared in the chat box by Dee Dee. Before we end our session, here's a short message from the Oregon Department of Education. ODE supports equity and excellence for every learner and seeks to work with school districts, education service districts, and community partners like you. We believe all children should have access to high-quality, well-rounded learning experiences. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. Thank you for taking this training with us. We hope you found it helpful. ODE C&P greatly appreciates all CACFP Oregon sponsors and their staff who work directly and diligently to serve nutritious meals to participants while in care. Have a great remainder of your afternoon.